What's cracking, y'all? You are now watching Boo TV. Appreciate you for stopping in. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, stay notified, and let's get into the topic for today.
Greg Popovich, 5-time NBA champion, 3-time NBA Coach of the Year, 4-time NBA All-Star Game head coach. Most would say Greg Popovich is one of the greatest coaches in sports history. Greg Popovich is obviously then one of the greatest coaches in NBA history. Actually, most people have Greg Popovich in their top 3 NBA coaches of all time, and some people consider Greg Popovich the greatest NBA head coach of all time. Coached his entire career with the San Antonio Spurs. And even before that, he was an assistant coach elsewhere, going all the way back to 1973 with the Air Force being an assistant coach. But my question to you all is, do you think Greg Popovich would have had the same level of success given the Chicago Bulls roster that Phil Jackson had, and the Shaq and Kobe Los Angeles Lakers roster that Phil Jackson had? Do you think Greg Popovich could have had the same level of success with those same rosters? Personally, me, I don't think Greg Popovich is the best coach of all time. I probably have him number 2 or 3 without giving it much thought. I think Phil Jackson is the greatest coach of all time. Greg Popovich is a little bit more of a X's and O's guy than Phil Jackson is. But one thing that Greg Popovich struggled with that Phil Jackson is is the GOAT with, the greatest of all time, is coaching and managing superstars, especially superstars with egos that can be problematic, that can be prima donnas, that can cause friction and tension in the locker rooms with attitudes and play styles and certain lifestyles. That is something that Greg Popovich could not do, at least on the level of Phil Jackson. And from what I've seen, Greg Popovich had some struggles with this through his coaching career. See, Phil Jackson Tim Duncan was the perfect player. And David Robinson as well. D-Rob, Duncan, and then those supporting cats, Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili. Those guys were the perfect seeds of greatness for Greg Popovich to sow and cultivate and grow with and lead. But I'm telling you this right now. Could he have dealt with Dennis Rodman? Would he have handled the Dennis Rodman situations like Phil Jackson did in a very unorthodox way? In a way that not a single NBA coach would have took the approach that Phil Jackson did, as far as letting Dennis Rodman go do his thing. Don't worry about him. He needs this. He needs this to be ready for the game. Let him go out, miss practices, whatever, not be with the team. Sending a player out to go retrieve him in Las Vegas to bring him back for game time. Come on, man. That's not happening in today's league. Not a single coach would have the kahunas or the right ego to make that kind of move and let that player, for lack of a better word, get his rocks off and do the things he needs to do, despite missing team functions, because they need this guy, and this is what he needed to go through at this point in his life for him to be ready for this game. Who's doing that? Phil Jackson and all his unorthodox coaching methods, passing out books, getting into Zen, tapping into yourself, all these things, freaking incense in the locker rooms, smudging the locker room with sage and sweet grass, where many players initially scoffed and laughed at it when Phil was introducing them to all these kinds of Zen-like activities, if you will. And eventually, players bought into it. I believe Kyrie Irving was smudging in the locker room at one point when James Harden was on the squad with Kevin Durant. And James Harden basically called Kyrie Irving a weirdo for doing that. And I was like, I'm pretty sure the Lakers was doing that with Phil Jackson. I'm pretty sure Kobe Bryant was doing that in the locker room or being a part of it in some capacity. Kobe scoffed at it when he was a young buck when Phil first joined the Lakers. But he eventually bought into all the Phil Jackson antics. Hell, Phil Jackson kicked Jerry West out of the locker room so that he can address the team. Just the coach, or the coaches, and the ball players. Because that's how he wanted to address them. Jerry West, the general manager at the time. Jerry West, one of the greatest basketball players of all time, in a Laker uniform at that. Phil Jackson said, hell out the locker room. We don't need you here right now. I don't want you here right now. Come on. Would Greg Popovich have been able to handle the Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal drama, rift, arguments, fights, egos, styles of play? Both of them were hard-headed. Both of them were stubborn. Especially Kobe Bryant. That's my favorite player of all time. Especially that version of Kobe Bryant. Stubborn as hell. You know how much drama Phil Jackson had to deal with in that locker room between Shaq and Kobe? All them seasons. And at times it was very, very, very bad. Greg Popovich wouldn't have been able to handle that. Crazy thing is, Phil Jackson had a bigger ego than both Shaq and Kobe. One time Shaq and Kobe were feuding. Phil Jackson walks in the locker room, starts laughing. Or maybe they were in his office, I can't remember. And then they looking at him, they're like, this guy, what is he laughing for? He's like, not verbatim, but Phil was like, you guys are so funny. You guys are so cute. Out here fighting, bickering with your big egos. And the funny thing is, my ego's bigger than both of y'all's. That happened. Greg Popovich, I don't believe, could manage those guys and be as successful with those guys. Because he wasn't a Zen master like Phil was a Zen master. He couldn't manage those kinds of personalities. Those strong kinds of personalities. Hell, I ain't even getting into Jordan either. I believe Greg Popovich would have lost those players in some capacity. In a way, Phil Jackson never really lost anybody in that capacity. I've seen Greg Popovich deal with disgruntled star players or pseudo-star players, whatever the case may be. And it didn't turn out so hot. And these guys nearly weren't the load as Rodman, Shaq, and Kobe. Now, let's not forget that Dennis Rodman was on the San Antonio Spurs for a few years. But at no point during his tenure with the San Antonio Spurs was Greg Popovich ever the head coach. By the time Rodman got traded to the Bulls, I think 1 or 2 years after that, Greg Popovich came in as the head coach. And then for a little bit there, I think he was like assistant general manager or general manager for the Spurs organization. But while Dennis Rodman was a Spur, he was problematic. And given the kind of franchise that the San Antonio Spurs are, you know how people say a class organization, Dennis Rodman was pure toxicity. Dennis had physical altercations with John Stockton and Stacey King. Remember, he was having that affair with Madonna at the time. And allegedly, don't know if it's true or not, that she called the Spurs front office just to try to reconnect with Dennis Rodman. Dennis Rodman chucked a bag of ice at Coach Bob Hill. Dennis Rodman refused to leave the basketball court after he was ejected by the referees. And the things that Dennis Rodman would say about people in the organization. Rodman called Coach Hill a loser. Rodman even went in on Greg Popovich when he was the GM. Rodman said, quote, he lost sight of everything else. And then when he decided he couldn't do anything with me, he badmouthed me and gave me away for next to nothing. Then he pretended it was good for the team, referring to when he got pushed out and traded to the Chicago Bulls. David Robinson's comments about Dennis Rodman after Rodman left were this, quote, it was like a zoo last year. Now we'll be able to just focus on basketball. There won't be any of that other garbage. Everyone is relieved. Dennis is a complicated guy. He's an easy guy to like because he has a good heart. He wants to play hard. He wants to do the right things. But as far as the team goes, he was so destructive to a team perspective. These are just some things that went on while Dennis Rodman was a Spur. See how quickly Greg Popovich got rid of him? No time wasted. He couldn't have coached Dennis Rodman like Phil did. Someone that was destructive and toxic went over to the Chicago Bulls and was a key contributor to 3 straight championships under Phil Jackson. You saw how Phil handled him, and you saw how the Spurs organization handled him, and even Pop as a GM. Steven Jackson had problems with Greg Popovich. Serious problems with Greg Pop and some of the players on the Spurs team. Other players that were unhappy with Greg Popovich and how he coached and being with the San Antonio Spurs. DeMar DeRozan, when he was with the Spurs, was reported to be unhappy. And I believe it. DeJounte Murray, a rising star at the time on the Spurs, was unhappy with Pop and how he was used in the San Antonio Spurs. We all know what happened with Kawhi Leonard and the mismanagement of his situation. He got the hell up out of there. Just like Murray did, just like DeRozan did, just like Jackson did. I definitely believe Greg Popovich has a shorter leash when it comes to these kinds of things. And with that being said, he either won't deal with it or deal with it long enough or try to dissect it or diffuse it or welcome it and face it head on and challenge it in the way Phil Jackson would and be successful at it. And that's one reason why I definitely, outside of the ring count, and I get Phil Jackson had greater players than Pop, so he's not going to win the ring count. But with all those great players came a bunch of personalities and a lot of personal management that Phil had to deal with. And he did it better than anybody could have ever done it, in my opinion. But aside from the basketball point, there's a whole nother area where Phil Jackson is the greatest of all time, and that's managing players and finding ways to get those players to take all that stuff going on the side and manipulating it and using it in a way to be positive for the player and the team. Phil's a mastermind, man. Absolutely. Pop couldn't have did that, baby. No, sir. No, sir. I got Pop number 2 or 3 all time, but I don't think he would have had the same level of success that Phil had, very specifically with Rodman, Kobe, and Shaq. And then you can probably say Jordan and Pippen to a lesser degree. But definitely those 3. I can tell you right now, Pop would have had Kobe Bryant traded early in his career. As much as Kobe Bryant went against the grain, because he still wanted to accomplish things personally as well as still accomplish team success. Pop would have got rid of Kobe early. I'm telling you. I truly believe that. Because Kobe was a pit bull. Pit bull, confident, stubborn. Kobe would challenge ideas. Kobe would challenge authority. Kobe would push you as a coach. Push you to be the absolute best coach you could be and you should be by giving you everything you can handle. He was going to make your ass coach. Young Kobe especially. Now his relationship with Phil Jackson was very different with their second tenure with each other. They both matured, especially Kobe. And from day one they were on the same page. And they had success. Anyway, y'all let me know what you think about it. Do you believe, given those Chicago Bulls teams, at least with Dennis Rodman, the second three-peat at a minimum, and those Kobe and Shaq teams, do you think Greg Popovich would have had the same level of success? Let me know in the comment section. And if you disagree, let me know why. You probably have some good points. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, stay notified. Catch you on the next one. We out, baby.